Welcome. Tonight our journey takes us to a land that is not just lost in time, but lost in isolation. We travel to a continent that evolved its own, separate and far harsher dream of life. We are journeying to Sahul, the vast sun-scorched and fire-tempered world of prehistoric Australia. This is a land that time forgot, and in its forgetting it created a different kind of monster. When the rest of the world was experimenting with placental mammals, with the ancestors of horses, lions and wolves, this great island continent, this isolated laboratory, was building a different kind of giant. It built a rhinoceros-sized wombat. It built a kangaroo that walked instead of hopped. And it built, in its terrible ingenuity, a lion that was not a cat, but a pouched and silent horror. This was a world where mammals, for all their strange grandeur, were not the true apex. Here, the ancient, cold-blooded nightmare of the reptilian age never truly ended. It was a land ruled by a 7-meter venomous lizard, a land where giant, land-walking crocodiles galloped through the open forests, and where the waterholes were guarded by serpents of a forgotten lineage. This was perhaps the most dangerous place that has ever existed on Earth, a continent where every shadow, every rustle and every pool of water held a different, specialized and ancient kind of death. Tonight, we will explore this isolated, burning continent. We will meet the ponderous, impossible giants and the swift, venomous and reptilian tyrants that hunted them. And we will ask the quiet, chilling question: why? Why did this one lonely continent produce a world of such profound, such relentless, and such spectacular danger? It is a journey into a world that operates on a different, drier, and perhaps far harsher timescale than our own. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Sharing this slow, burning descent into a lost time is, as always, a quiet comfort. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Imagine it as the sound of a dry, ancient wind blowing across a plain of red dust, carrying the faint, oily and aromatic scent of 1,000,000 acres of eucalyptus. Let the familiar, safe and fast-paced world fade away, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins with a geological severing, a tear in the fabric of time. While the destinies of other continents remained interlinked, this one chose a path of solitude. Nearly 50 million years ago, the landmass of Australia tore its final connection from the icy embrace of Antarctica, breaking free from the last vestiges of the supercontinent Gondwana. It began a slow, inexorable drift north, into a warm and unknown isolation. This was more than a drift, it was a withdrawal. In the rest of the world, a great revolution was writing the history of mammals. The placental mammals, the ancestors of cats, dogs, horses and primates, were spreading, crossing land bridges between Asia, Africa and the Americas. They competed, they clashed, they honed one another, forcing each other to become faster, smarter and deadlier in a relentless arms race. But Australia was not invited to this revolution. It was an island continent, a vast, isolated laboratory, surrounded by the immense, uncrossable and blue deserts of the ocean. No new ideas, no new mammalian designs from the outside world could reach it. The continent was left alone with its own ancient stock, its own ancient rules. Life here would evolve to the rhythm of a different and slower metronome. This legacy of isolation became its defining truth. This would be the world of the marsupial, not the placental. Life would be carried not in the warm, secure darkness of a womb, but in the uncertain, milk-filled, semi-external world of a pouch. This simple, evolutionary fork in the road changed everything. In this laboratory, a single, primitive, pouched blueprint exploded to fill every ecological niche that was left vacant. The rest of the world required a lion, and so did Australia. It created a marsupial lion. The world needed a hippopotamus. Australia designed its own lumbering, pouched giant for the riverbanks. It needed a rhinoceros. Australia invented a wombat the size of one. It is the greatest and strangest monument to convergent evolution. The continent rebuilt the rest of the world in its own dreamlike image, from its own genetic clay, without ever having seen the original. But this isolation came at a cost. In the absence of competition, especially from the great placental predators, this ecosystem settled into a different kind of equilibrium. Evolution slowed. Good enough was allowed to win, where perfect was not required. This was not a world of weakness, it was a world of naivety. For millions of years, its giants lived out their own slow, ponderous and insular drama, unaware of the ruthless efficiency, the speed and the intelligence of the world outside. It was a land that time truly forgot. The life upon it was written in a key, a musical score that the rest of the world had long since misplaced. But this laboratory was not a blank canvas. The isolation had determined the kind of life, but it was the ruthless, unforgiving nature of the continent itself that would determine its character. This was not a world of water and plenty. This was to be a world of fire and thirst. The isolation of this continent was only the first act. It set the stage, but the drama itself, the brutal and specific character of its life, was dictated by the land itself. This was not a gentle, fertile or forgiving laboratory. This was a furnace. Australia, in its long solitary drift, had moved into a latitude of profound and ancient dryness. This was a land defined not by its abundance, but by its deep, elemental and defining scarcity. The first and most fundamental truth of this continent was its poverty. The soil itself was ancient, tired and thin. While other parts of the world were being remade by volcanoes, by glaciers grinding mountains into fresh mineral-rich dust, Australia had been left alone. It was a flat, weathered and leached landscape. The very building blocks of life, the phosphates, the nitrates, the essential minerals, were not a given. They were a treasure, locked away and guarded jealously by the earth. This was not a land that gave life easily. It was a land that made life fight for every single molecule. This profound, underlying poverty created a different kind of evolution. It forged a world of extreme efficiency, of desperate measures, of creatures and plants that became masters of holding on, of recycling, of defending the few precious nutrients they had managed to acquire. It was a world of slow growth, of hard bodies, of chemical warfare. And upon this poor, red earth fell the second great truth, the thirst. This was a continent of spectacular geological scale drought. The rain was not a promise, it was a rumor, a memory. The story of life here was not written in rivers, but in dry, sandy riverbeds, in salt pans, and in the agonizing, patient wait for a sky that held its moisture captive. This was the great, defining, continental thirst. Life, therefore, became a desperate pilgrimage. The entire, vast and complex ecosystem was tethered by an invisible, unbreakable chain to the few, isolated and shrinking sources of water. The waterhole. This was not just a feature of the landscape, it was the entire stage. It was the bank, the trading floor, the church and the executioner's block, all in one. It was the single point in 1,000 square miles where every creature, from the tiniest armored insect to the most ponderous giant wombat, had to come. And in this forced, desperate congregation, the rules of isolation were shattered. Here, the slow-moving herbivores were forced to stand, vulnerable and exposed, beside the very predators that had evolved to kill them. It was a place of unbearable, concentrated and inevitable danger. And finally, To this world of poor soil and desperate thirst came the third and most spectacular element, the fire. In this dry, hot land, fire was not an accident. It was not a disaster. It was a geological force, a creative and destructive partner in the dance of evolution. It was a season. The air itself, rich with the oily, flammable vapors of the ancient trees, was primed to explode. A flash of lightning in the dry, rustling canopy was not a spark. It was a detonation. Vast, continent-spanning firestorms would have raged across this land, a wall of flame hundreds of feet high, incinerating everything. The heat was so intense it would have sterilized the poor soil, the roar so loud it would have drowned out every other sound. It was the great, periodic, and fiery filter. To survive here, life had to be born of the flame. It had to embrace the inferno, and so life did. Trees evolved bark that was a foot thick, a heat shield for the living wood within. They evolved seeds that could not open until the fire had passed, their shells waiting for the heat shock to crack them, to release their children into a fresh bed of ash. This crucible of poor earth, of desperate thirst, and of all-consuming fire could not support the soft, gentle, and easy life of other lands. It did not create lush, sprawling jungles of broad, tender leaves. Instead, it forged a kingdom of a different, tougher, and far more resilient nature, a forest of armor, of chemical warfare, of profound, unyielding, and patient defense. It demanded a flora that was as hard, as defensive, and as chemically hostile as the land itself. It created the sclerophyll kingdom. The word itself means hard leaf. It is a botany of survival. Here, the kings were not the oaks or the maples. The kings were the eucalyptus and the acacia, and they were monarchs of a brutal, resilient, and chemical dynasty. The eucalyptus, the great gum tree, defined this world. It was the perfect child of the fire and the thirst. Its leaves were not the soft, open palms of a rainforest tree, held up to catch the sun. They were hard, waxy, and leathery daggers, hanging vertically, their edges turned to the sky. This was a gesture of profound desperation, an architecture designed to minimize, to deflect, to endure the punishing, endless heat. And these leaves were not food. They were a chemical fortress. They were low in protein, poor in nutrients, and saturated with a substance that was both a defense and a weapon, a thick, pungent, and highly volatile oil. This was the tree's blood, its antiseptic, its poison. It was a taste so bitter, so medicinal, that it repelled almost all life. This was a forest that did not want to be eaten. This oil, this chemical signature, did more than defend the leaves. It filled the air. It was the very breath of the continent. On a hot, still day, this oil would rise from the canopy in a faint, blue and aromatic haze, a calm, chill mist that hung in the valleys. It was a beautiful, ethereal, and sleepy perfume. But it was the perfume of a trap. It was the smell of 1,000,000 acres of tinder, an oily, flammable vapor that, in the dry heat, made the very air explosive, welcoming the fire it was born from. Alongside these giants stood the acacias, the wattles. They were the other side of this defensive coin. What they lacked in chemical poison, they made up for in physical armor. Their leaves were often not leaves at all, but hardened, flattened, spiky stems, and their branches were lined with a vicious, unyielding array of thorns. This, then, was the base of the food chain. This was the plenty that the continent offered. It was not a generous buffet. It was a locked pantry, a larder filled with poison, with armor, and with indigestible fiber. And this simple, hostile fact of botany shaped every single animal that dared to live here. To eat this, to survive on this, a creature could not be a simple, fast-moving grazer. It required a different body. It demanded a different metabolism. It needed to be a slow, patient, and powerful alchemist, a living furnace capable of breaking down poison and wood. This hostile, armored kingdom of plants was the architect of the strange, ponderous, and impossible giants that were to come. It was the age that demanded a different kind of animal, the age of the marsupial. This armored, chemical, and fire-forged kingdom demanded a new kind of animal. It required a metabolism that was slow, patient, and cool. It required a life that was not a frantic sprint, but a slow, cautious, and profoundly efficient marathon. It needed a creature that could endure, that could wait, and that could, above all, manage the profound, unpredictable, and violent risks of this burning continent. And the isolated continent, in its ancient wisdom, had only one template to offer. This was the age of the marsupial. This was not a choice. It was the inheritance. It was the only tool in the evolutionary box, the only blueprint that had survived the long, lonely drift from Gondwana. But this blueprint, this idea of the pouch, would prove to be the single greatest and most perfect adaptation to this world of fire and thirst. To understand why, we must understand the difference in philosophy, the profound gamble that separates the pouched from the placental. The placental mammals, the ancestors of the lions and the wolves and ourselves, make an enormous all-or-nothing bet. They invest everything up front. Pregnancy is a long, costly, and internal siege, a mother pouring her own resources, her own body, into a fetus that grows, complex and heavy, within her. It is a bet on a stable future. It is a promise that there will be enough food, enough water, and enough safety to see this long 9-month or 12-month or 20-month journey to its end. The marsupial makes a different and far more cautious wager. Its philosophy is born of instability. The initial investment is almost nothing. The pregnancy is a brief, fleeting, and simple thing. And the baby that is born is not a baby at all. It is a promise. It is an embryo, a tiny, blind, pink, and impossibly vulnerable jelly bean, a being that is more fetus than creature. Its one single heroic act is to crawl in a blind, swimming motion from the birth canal into the warm, milk-filled, and leathery darkness of the pouch. The real pregnancy, the real growth, happens here, in this external womb. And in this one simple anatomical difference lies the key to surviving prehistoric Australia. Imagine the continent. Imagine the sudden continent-spanning firestorm, the wall of flame that incinerates the world in an afternoon. A heavily pregnant placental giant, weighed down by a near-term fetus, cannot run. She is a slow, heavy, and doomed investment. If she dies, the fetus dies. The entire genetic line is a cinder. Now imagine the marsupial mother in that same burning eucalyptus forest. She too is pregnant, but her pregnancy is a tiny, external, and low-cost embryo clinging to a teat in her pouch. As the fire approaches, her body, in a moment of profound, cold, and biological triage, makes a terrible and necessary choice. She can abandon the pouch young. She can, in an instant, sacrifice the minimal investment, the tiny, unformed jelly bean, to save the one irreplaceable thing, herself. She saves the factory. This is the grim, beautiful, and essential genius of the pouch. It is an evolutionary escape hatch in a world of constant, unpredictable, and fatal disaster. If the drought comes and the waterholes dry, a placental mother lactating for her fully formed young will starve and both will die. A marsupial mother in that same drought can simply let her body's chemistry shut down. The milk stops, the tiny embryo in the pouch expires, and she, with her own precious adult body, can walk on to find the next distant water source, to wait for the rain, and to begin again when the world is new. This one, flexible, low risk, and resilient design, was the only thing that could work here. And with this single blueprint, this one, perfect, adaptive tool, the marsupial lineage exploded. It was the only game in town, and it filled every empty waiting stage. It became a burrower. It became a climber. It became, in time, a killer. But its first and greatest challenge was to conquer the sclerophyll kingdom. Its first task was to find a way to eat the poison, to digest the wood, to grow fat on a diet of thorns and oil. To do this, it needed more than a pouch. It needed size. It needed a body that was a vast, slow-burning furnace, a living fermentation vat. The age of the marsupial was, first and foremost, the age of the ponderous, impossible titans. It was the age of the wombat-rhino. This age of marsupial giants, born from the crucible of fire and scarcity, needed a king. And in the slow, patient and grinding logic of this isolated world, a king was crowned. It was not a creature of speed, or of fangs, or of armor. It was a creature of pure, magnificent and ponderous size. We call it Diprotodon. This was the largest marsupial that has ever lived. It was the continent's answer to the rhinoceros or the hippopotamus, a masterpiece of convergent evolution built from the most humble of blueprints. Its closest living relative is the wombat, that small, stubborn, and subterranean creature of the night. But Diprotodon was a wombat built on a different, almost mythical scale. Imagine a creature the size of a large rhinoceros, but with the thick, coarse fur, the heavy, shuffling gait, and the small, deep-set eyes of its burrowing cousin. It was a moving mountain of flesh, a 4-ton, slow-motion engine of digestion, the ultimate expression of the sclerophyll kingdom's demands. Its life was a slow, quiet, and relentless quest for food. We must imagine it moving through the dry, open forests of eucalyptus, its footsteps not a sharp crack, but a heavy, muffled, and percussive thud that shook the red, dusty earth. It was a creature of profound, almost geological slowness. It had no need for speed. Its defense was its own colossal, unassailable bulk. It was, in all likelihood, a creature of profound, naive fearlessness, a giant so large that the concept of a predator was almost an abstraction. This was the living furnace, the fermentation vat on legs that the hostile, poisonous Flora had demanded. Its enormous, barrel-shaped body was a vast, complex laboratory, a gut designed to hold the tough, fibrous, and oily leaves for days, for weeks, to slowly, patiently, and alchemically break them down to extract every last, precious calorie from a diet of poison and wood. It would have moved through the hazy, blue-lit world of the gum trees like a dream, a slow, shaggy, and silent titan. Its jaws, armed with 2 huge, ever-growing incisors, methodically stripping the bark and leaves. It was the undisputed king of the slow world, a creature whose very presence, whose simple, daily, and ponderous passage was an act of geological patience. Its slow, relentless consumption was a force that shaped the very character of the forest it walked through. The life of this ponderous giant was not one of drama, but of process. It was not a life of hunts or of narrow escapes. It was a life of pure geological scale consumption, a slow, relentless, and unthinking pilgrimage that spanned decades. This creature, this living furnace, was defined by the profound, crushing poverty of the sclerophyll kingdom. To fuel a body the size of a rhinoceros on a diet of indigestible, poisonous, and nutrient-poor leaves, the Diprotodon had only one strategy: volume. It could not afford to be a selective eater, a delicate browser. It was a bulk feeder, a living harvester. Its 2 great forward-jutting incisors were not tools for plucking. They were tools for uprooting. We must imagine it, moving at its glacial pace through the open, hazy eucalyptus forest. It was an incessant, unstoppable eater. It consumed the world. It would have pulled up entire bushes by their roots, its massive, grinding molars pulverizing the tough, woody stems, leaves, and bark into a fibrous pulp. It was a metabolism that was a cool, patient, and deliberate fire, a gut that had to work for days to extract the barest minimum of energy from the toxic, woody mass. This demand for constant, high-volume feeding meant that its life was a journey. It could not stay in one place, and it did not travel alone. The fossil record, in its cold, silent arithmetic, suggests a creature of community. At sites like Lake Calabona, a vast, dry salt pan, we find the remains of not one, but hundreds of these giants huddled together in death as they perhaps were in life. They were caught, it seems, in the final agonizing stages of a mega-drought, the last muddy vestiges of a waterhole having become their grave. This tells us that they moved in herds, slow, shaggy, and formidable herds. We must now imagine not one, but 20 of these giants, moving in a slow-motion wave across the red, dusty plains. And in this, we find the answer to their true impact, their culpability upon the land. A herd of Diprotodon was not just a part of the landscape, it was the landscape's architect. Their presence was a physical force, an agent of geological change. Their immense collective weight, the shuffling of 100 heavy feet, would have carved permanent pathways through the dense acacia scrub, creating Diprotodon highways that other, smaller creatures would use for generations. They were unthinking engineers. As they fed, they would have toppled trees, pushed over the cycads, and cleared vast patches of forest, creating clearings and changing the very character of the vegetation. Their passage was not a quiet one. It was a slow, crushing, and relentless restructuring of the world around them. And their greatest impact, their most profound and terrible guilt, would have been felt at the place that mattered most, the waterhole. Imagine this herd, driven by the continental thirst, arriving at one of the few, precious, and shrinking sources of water. They would have descended into the mud, their immense weight compacting the soft earth around the rim into a hard, pockmarked, and lifeless pavement. They would have wallowed like giant furred hippos, turning the clear, precious water into a thick, brown, and churning soup, making it inaccessible to the smaller, more delicate creatures that shared their world. They were the kings, the ponderous, naive, and slow-moving rulers of this ancient kingdom. Their very existence, their simple daily need to eat and to drink, was a force that made this already harsh world even harsher for everything else. They were the masters of the slow world, the heavy-footed walkers. But this kingdom, for all its scarcity, was vast, and it had room for another kind of giant, a creature that took a familiar, successful blueprint, the jumper, and forced it into a strange, new, and unfamiliar form. The image of the kangaroo is the very symbol of the Australian continent. It is a creature of grace, of speed, of the open plain, a living spring of muscle and tendon, a perfect adaptation for bounding across a vast, flat land. It is an image of frantic, beautiful, and efficient motion. But the sclerophyll kingdom, in its strange and ancient laboratory, had a different and far heavier version of this design. We look into the past, and we find a kangaroo that is not a creature of grace, but a creature of impossible, hulking power. This was Procoptodon Goliath, the giant, short-faced kangaroo. It was a titan of its kind, a being that could stand 3 meters tall when reaching for the high branches, its body a dense, muscular, and formidable mass. And it was not just its size that was alien, it was its face. This was not the gentle, deer-like and delicate face of its modern cousins. This was a short, blunt, and heavy-muzzled skull, almost like that of a bear. Its jaws were deep, its molars massive and complex, a grinding mill designed not for soft grasses, but for the tough, woody, and chemically defended leaves of the sclerophyll kings. Its arms were equally strange, long and powerful, ending in two, delicate-looking but strong, grasping fingers. These were not the small, ineffectual arms of a modern hopper. These were grappling hooks, tools for reaching high into the canopy, for pulling down the thorny, defiant branches of the acacias and the oily, tough eucalyptus, to bring the food of the giants down to its powerful, grinding mouth. But its most profound and most unsettling difference was in its feet, the very foundation of its being. A modern kangaroo has a long, flexible, four-toed foot, an elastic-like springboard for the hop. Procoptodon had abandoned this. Its foot was short, wide, and had evolved into a single, massive, dominant toe, ending in a hard, hoof-like nail. This is not the foot of a jumper. This is not a design for elastic, high-speed bounding. This is the foot of a walker. This is a creature that forces us to reimagine the very essence of kangaroo. This giant, in all likelihood, did not hop. Or if it did so only rarely. It was a heavyweight. It was a brawler. It moved instead with a heavy, striding bipedal gait, its immense body balanced on those two hoof-like feet, its massive, muscular tail acting as a third, stabilizing leg, a walking, living tripod. We must imagine it, not bounding, but striding through the dry, open, hazy eucalyptus forest. A giant, bare-faced and deliberate browser, its long, hooked fingers pulling the world down to its mouth. It was a kangaroo that had traded the frantic, high energy and bounding grace of its lineage for the slow, ponderous and efficient plod of a giant. It was a magnificent, walking and successful experiment. It was the master of the high brows, a creature that could reach the foliage that the ponderous Diprotodon could not. But this vertical niche, this world of leaves just out of reach, was not its kingdom alone. In these same dry, open forests, another, even stranger giant was competing for the very same prize, a creature not of fur and pouch, but of feather and of a beak so large it was a weapon in itself. This world of the high brows, this canopy of tough, poisonous leaves, was a contested kingdom. The walking kangaroo, with its hooked fingers and grinding jaws, was not the only giant reaching for this prize. It had a rival that was not a mammal, not a creature of fur and pouch, but a feathered titan, a being from an older reptilian lineage, and it was defined by a beak of such colossal and terrifying proportions that it blurred the line between a tool and a weapon. This was Dromornis, or as it is whispered in the cultural memory of the land, the Mihirung, the demon duck of doom. To call this creature a duck is a profound and dangerous understatement. It is a label of false familiarity, an attempt to tame a creature that was, in its essence, a monster. This was the heaviest bird the world has ever known. It stood 3 meters tall, a feathered column of muscle and bone, weighing perhaps half a ton. It was a bird that weighed more than a grand piano. It was a flightless, formidable and heavy-footed titan, and it moved through the same open, hazy forests as the giant wombats and the walking kangaroos. But it is the head, the skull, that holds the true, calm, chill terror of this creature. The skull was not the light, hollow and delicate thing of a modern bird. It was a massive, thick-boned and powerful structure, and at its front was the beak. It was not the flat, harmless bill of a waterfowl. It was a deep, sharp-edged and immensely powerful hatchet, a shearing blade of bone and keratin, driven by a skull whose muscle attachment spoke of a devastating and crushing force. This is the central, terrifying and unresolved mystery of prehistoric Australia. What was this beak for? For decades we saw this creature as a gentle giant, a demon duck in name only. We imagined it as a colossal, flightless goose, a peaceful, herbivorous browser. In this vision, the great shearing beak was a specialized tool, a pair of living garden shears designed for the one tough, woody challenge of the sclerophyll kingdom. It was a beak for snipping the tough, fibrous and thorny branches of the acacia, for slicing through the woody stems that the kangaroos, with their grinding teeth, could not. It was a herbivore, its immense size, like that of the Diprotodon, just another requirement for a vast, slow-burning gut that could digest this impossible, poisonous and unnutritious world. But this land, this isolated laboratory, is a place of brutal specialization, and there is another, darker and more chilling interpretation. We look at the beak again, and we do not see a garden shear. We see a weapon. We see the beak of a predator, a hatchet designed not for wood, but for flesh and bone. The skull, for all its size, has a small, simple brain case, but the architecture for its jaw muscles is immense. This was a creature capable of a bite that could shear, that could crush, that could dismember. We must now imagine this, a 3-meter-tall, half-ton duck that hunts. We must imagine this feathered titan moving with its heavy, thudding gait through the open forest, its head held high, its great, sharp-edged beak a guillotine held in waiting. Was it an ambush predator? Was it a creature that used its immense size and its hatchet-like face to attack the young, vulnerable and pouch-bound calves of the Diprotodon? Did it stalk the walking kangaroos, its one massive, crushing bite the end of the hunt? Or was it the ultimate terrifying scavenger, a feathered hyena on a colossal scale, its beak the only tool in the forest capable of shearing through the thick, tough hide of a dead giant, of splitting the massive prehistoric bones to get at the marrow within? We will never know for certain. The demon duck remains an enigma, a perfect symbol of this continent. It is a creature that is, at the same time, a plausible, peaceful herbivore and a terrifying, bone-crushing carnivore. It is a creature whose very nature is ambiguous, a living, feathered question mark. Its presence in this forest, a giant that could be either a fellow grazer or a monstrous killer, would have made this world a place of profound, psychological and uncertain danger. These giants, the wombat, the kangaroo and the demon bird, were the masters of the dry, open forest, the kings of the sclerophyll. But this continent of thirst was not all dry. It had edges, it had coastlines, and it had deep, wet, sluggish river systems. And in these wetter, softer and swampier margins, another, stranger branch of the giant marsupial family was making its home. The dry, open and fire-haunted forest was the kingdom of the great grazers and browsers, a world defined by toughness. But this continent of thirst was not a monolith. It had a different face. Along its coastlines and snaking deep into its arid heart were ribbons of a softer, wetter and more ancient world. There were sluggish, winding rivers, deep, permanent waterholes, and vast, swampy, reed-choked billabongs. This was a world of mud, of dampness, of soft, lush and non-poisonous vegetation. And this different, gentler kingdom demanded a different kind of giant. If the Diprotodon was the wombat-rhino of the dry plains, this was its counterpart in the wet. We call it Zygomaturus, the marsupial hippo. It was a creature of the same ponderous, heavyweight lineage, a four-legged, barrel-chested titan, but its body was not built for the endless, dry march. Its skull was stranger, heavier, its snout broader, and its teeth were not the grinders of the eucalyptus forest. They were the simpler, broader teeth of a creature that fed on the soft, fleshy and watery reeds, the sedges and the roots of the riverbank. But it is the head that sets it apart. The skull of Zygomaturus is a piece of strange and perhaps defensive architecture. Rising from its broad, flat snout, just in front of its eyes, were two short, blunt and horn-like projections. This was a giant, four-horned hippo wombat, a creature of the swamp. We must imagine it, not in the dusty blue haze of the gum trees, but in the deep, green and misty light of a prehistoric wetland. Its heavy, columnar legs would have been caked in dark, rich mud, its thick, shaggy fur perpetually damp. Its life was one of slow, semi-aquatic patience. It was a master of the margins, the soft, treacherous boundary between the water and the land. Its presence would have been a sound of profound, wet and heavy movement. The sound of a half-ton body pushing with a great sucking plop through the dense reed-filled shallows. It was a living excavator, its broad, shovel-like snout digging up the nutritious roots from the riverbed, its horn-like face perhaps used to push through the impossibly thick, tangled vegetation. This was its refuge, its sanctuary. Here, in the soft, wet and bountiful world of the swamp, it was safe from the fires that raged on the plains. Here, there was always water. Here, there was always food. But this soft, wet world was not a paradise. It was, in its own way, a place of even more concentrated and more hidden danger. This river system, this swamp, was the hunting ground for the true apex predators of the continent. The sanctuary of the water was also the ambush point. The marsupial hippo, for all its bulk, was a soft-bodied, slow-moving and vulnerable target. It was a giant, but it was a victim, and it shared this wet, treacherous and beautiful world with another very different kind of giant, a creature that had solved the problem of survival not with size, but with the most perfect, impenetrable and ancient defense of all. It had built its own living and horned fortress. This world of the swamp, this soft, wet and treacherous margin, was a place of ambush. It demanded a different kind of survival. The marsupial hippo, for all its size, was a creature of soft flesh and thick fur. It was a target, but in these same slow and muddy waters, another, far more ancient lineage had perfected a different solution. It was a solution not of size, but of impregnability. It was a living fortress. We find its remains not just in the mud of the rivers, but washed up on the coastlines, a traveller of both land and water. We call it Meiolania, the Great Wanderer. But this was no simple turtle. This was a reptilian tank, a masterpiece of defensive, evolutionary architecture. Imagine a turtle the size of a small car, its shell a high, domed and massive bulwark of solid bone. But the armor did not stop there. This was a creature that had armored its armor. Its tail was not the soft, fleshy appendage of its modern cousins, but a long, heavy and rigid club, encased in rings of bone and studded with spikes, a weapon of pure, crushing defense. And its head, its most vulnerable part, was a fortress in itself. The skull was a solid, helmet-like block, from which two long, curving and magnificent horns swept backward, like those of a bull. This was a head so massive, so fortified, that it had sacrificed the very defining feature of a turtle. It could not retract it. It could not pull itself into its shell. It had no need to. This was a creature that did not hide from danger. It simply endured it. It was a living, walking and horned citadel. Its entire slow-moving existence was a statement of pure, passive defiance. It was a creature that, by its very design, told the rest of the world that it could not be eaten. We must imagine it, moving with a slow, ponderous and reptilian deliberation at the edge of the waterhole. It would have shared this space with the great, furred giants, a silent, armored and ancient contemporary. It would have grazed on the same soft aquatic plants as the Zygomaturus, its horned, impassive head moving with a slow, tearing motion. But its very existence is a profound and chilling piece of evidence. Evolution does not build a fortress of this scale for no reason. It does not evolve horned skulls and spiked, armored clubs in a world of peace. The Meiolania is a silent reptilian witness. Its body, its perfect, impenetrable and over-engineered armor, is a fossilized testament to the danger of this lost world. It is the perfect defensive answer to a question we have not yet fully asked. What kind of predator, what kind of crushing, bone-shattering force would make the evolution of such a creature necessary? This turtle was a masterpiece of defense, a cold-blooded, ancient solution to the problem of survival. But the dominant story of this continent, the story of the pouched mammals, was still being written. And this strange marsupial laboratory was not just producing these new, lumbering, hippo-like giants. It was also taking the forms that we find familiar, the forms that survived into our own time, and it was scaling them up, transforming the gentle and the familiar into something heavy, strange, and gigantic. The armored turtle was an ancient reptilian solution to the problem of survival, but the marsupial laboratory, in its relentless parallel experimentation, was not just building new forms like the wombat-rhino. It was also taking the familiar, successful blueprints of its modern survivors and pushing them to a scale that feels both recognizable and deeply unsettling. We look at the sclerophyll kingdom, and we see its most famous and most specialized inhabitant, the koala. In our own time, it is an icon of gentleness, a sleepy, chemically numbed and almost harmless creature, its entire existence a slow-motion dance with the poisonous eucalyptus leaf. It is a creature of the high canopy, a living definition of specialization. But the prehistoric version of this world, this continent of giants, took this familiar blueprint and, as it did with everything else, it amplified it. We look into the past, and we find Phascolarctos stirtoni, Sturton's giant koala. This was not the small, cuddly creature of our imagination. It was a heavyweight, a robust and powerful version, perhaps a full third larger and significantly heavier than its modern cousin. It was the ultimate super-specialized eucalyptus processing machine, its body a larger, more powerful, and even slower fermentation vat, designed to extract the last desperate calorie from the most toxic of all diets. We must imagine it, not as a light, arboreal acrobat, but as a heavy, ponderous climber, its movements slow, deliberate, and weighed down by its own bulk. Its existence was a slow, sleepy, and chemically induced haze, a life spent in the highest branches, methodically, relentlessly, and slowly chewing. But this extra size, this giantism, may have come at a cost. It may have changed the very nature of what it meant to be a koala. Its sheer weight may have made a life spent entirely in the high, thin branches a difficult or even impossible proposition. This giant koala may have been forced to spend far more of its time on the ground. This is a strange and chilling new image. Not a treetop creature, but a walking koala, a heavy, slow-moving and profoundly vulnerable creature, shuffling with a slow, awkward gait across the dry, open and dangerous forest floor, just to move from one giant gum tree to the next. In the high canopy it was safe, but on the ground it was a target. It was a slow, large and chemically numbed package of protein. It had no speed, it had no claws for defense, it had no armor. It was, in its essence, a living, breathing and walking meal. These creatures, these ponderous titans, the giant wombat-rhino, the walking kangaroo, the demon duck, the hippo of the swamp, and this heavy, walking koala were the great, slow and naive herbivores of this isolated continent. They were millions of tons of flesh, all built on a foundation of indigestible poison and thorns. They were the vast, walking and slow-moving larder of prehistoric Australia. This ecosystem, this vast, naive and abundant supply of prey, was a giant, empty and waiting niche. It was a banquet, laid out for a hunter that did not yet exist. The land, in its brutal evolutionary logic, demanded a predator. It required a killer specialized enough and powerful enough to bring these giants down. And in the dark, silent and isolated laboratory of the marsupial line, a killer was born. It was not a cat. It was something new. It was the lion in the pouch. This vast, walking larder of slow, heavy and naive flesh was an evolutionary imbalance. It was a continent filled with prey, but without a specialized mammalian predator to hunt them. The ancient reptiles, the giant lizards and crocodiles were there, but they were forces of the waterhole, of the ambush. The dry, open eucalyptus forests, the kingdom of the Diprotodon and the walking kangaroo, had a niche that was, for millions of years, conspicuously and dangerously empty. The land, in its brutal, unthinking logic, demanded a reaper, and in the isolated marsupial laboratory, an answer was conceived. It was an act of evolutionary genius and of profound, almost perverse creativity. The continent did not have the raw material of a cat or a dog or a bear, so it took what it had. It took the humble, quiet and herbivorous lineage of the vombatiforms, the ancestors of the koalas and the wombats, and in a dark, carnivorous twist, it forged a killer. This was Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion. The name itself is a paradox, a whisper of the creature's true alien nature. This was not a lion, it was not a cat, it was a pouched assassin. It was a creature with the stocky, immensely powerful and barrel-chested build of a bulldog or a small bear. It was not a sleek, graceful runner of the open plains. It was a low-slung, heavy and muscular powerhouse, an engine of pure, explosive and close-quarters power. It was a being built not for the chase, but for the ambush, for the sudden, terrible and final confrontation. And in this, we find its most chilling and most marsupial characteristic. This was a killer, perhaps the most efficient mammalian predator of its time. But it was a killer that raised its young in a pouch. We must imagine this. We must see this low-slung muscular hunter, its thick fur matted perhaps, with the blood of a giant kangaroo, its heavy shoulders rolling as it moves with a silent, shuffling gait through the hazy, blue-lit forest. And then, we must imagine it at rest, its tiny, embryonic, jelly bean-like young, blind and unformed, feeding, warm and safe, in the leathery darkness of its pouch. It is a profound and deeply unsettling contradiction. It is the fusion of a killer's life with a mother's gentle, vulnerable, and ancient biology. It is the lion in the pouch, a perfect, cold-blooded symbol of this isolated, alternate and dreamlike world. This creature was the continent's apex mammalian predator for millions of years. It was a success. But its success was not just in its unique, pouched biology. Its true, terrifying genius, its claim to the throne, was in the alien and specialized weapons it had evolved. Its skull, a heavy block of solid bone and muscle, was not the skull of a lion. It was something different. It was something perhaps even more brutal. It was a living bolt cutter. To look at the skull of the marsupial lion is to unlearn everything we think we know about predators. A lion, a wolf, or a tiger is a creature of fangs. Their skulls are defined by the 4 long, dagger-like canines, weapons designed to pierce, to hold, and to suffocate. They are instruments of a long, desperate, and intimate struggle. Thylacoleo had no such weapons. Its skull is a denial of this logic. It is a heavier, blunter, and more brutal piece of architecture. Where the long, elegant canines should be, there is almost nothing, just a small, insignificant peg. This creature did not hunt like a cat. It had invented a different, and perhaps far more terrifying, way to kill. Its weapon was at the very front of its face. Its incisors, the teeth that in its wombat ancestors were used for gnawing, had been transformed. They had become 2 massive, forward-jutting and blade-like shears, a pair of living bolt cutters. These were not tools for piercing, they were tools for severing, and the power behind them was immense. The skull of Thylacoleo is a masterpiece of leverage and force. Its cheekbones flare wide, providing a massive anchor point for the masseter muscles, the great closing muscles of the jaw. This was a skull that did not just bite, it crushed. Biomechanical studies of this architecture suggest it possessed the most powerful bite, pound for pound, of any mammal that has ever lived. It was a force that could shear through flesh, tendon, and even solid bone in a single catastrophic snap. This was a hyper-specialized killer. Its back teeth, its molars, were not the grinding mills of an omnivore, or even the complex slicing blades of a dog. They had been reduced, simplified, and refined into a single, long, shearing blade on each side, a pair of carnassials that worked in concert with the frontal shears. This was a mouth that knew only one motion, a vertical, slicing, and dismembering action. It was a living guillotine. But this creature's arsenal, this profound alien specialization, did not end at its jaw. The skull was the killing tool, but the restraint came from its hands. This was a creature that could grasp. Its forelimbs were immensely powerful, and its hands were not the running paws of a cat. They were grappling tools. And on each hand it held a secret weapon that is, perhaps, even more chilling than its bite. Its thumb, its first digit, was semi-opposable, and it was armed with a single, enormous, and deeply recurved claw. It was a switchblade, a meat hook, a climbing pick, held in a sheath of flesh until the moment of the strike. This was not a creature that chased its prey across the open plains. This was not a creature that wrestled its victims to the ground in a battle of stamina. This was a grappler, an executioner. We must now combine these two terrible weapons. We must imagine the Thylacoleo, its heavy, bear-like body held low to the ground, moving with a silent, muscular grace. It does not attack the legs, it attacks the body. It rears up, its immense grappling arms encircling its victim, perhaps a giant walking kangaroo, and it holds on. And as it holds, the great switchblade claw on its thumb is brought into play. It is a tool for climbing, for anchoring, for disemboweling. It is the hook that holds the prey fast, that negates all struggle, that locks the victim in a fatal, crushing embrace. And then, and only then, with the victim held motionless, pinned by the creature's sheer, bear-like weight and its terrible, anchoring claws, the head is brought in. The bolt-cutter jaws are applied, not to the throat in a long, slow suffocation, but to the neck, to the spine, or to the skull itself. A single, crushing, explosive bite. A snap of shearing bone, and it is over. This combination of weapons, the grappling arms, the anchoring claw, the heavy, powerful body, and the bone-shearing bite, is not the toolkit of a creature that lives on the flat, open ground. This is the toolkit of a specialist. This is the toolkit of a creature that understands the third dimension. It is the toolkit of an assassin that uses height and gravity as a weapon. This was not a lion of the plains. This was a lion of the trees. This creature was an ambush predator, but its ambush was not the swift, horizontal rush from the tall grass. Its arsenal, the grappling hooks and the bone shears, was the toolkit of a vertical hunter. This was a creature that had weaponized gravity. Thylacoleo was the lion of the trees. We must now reimagine this hazy, blue-lit eucalyptus forest, and we must learn to look up. The giant gum trees, the amber giants of a previous age, were not just the source of food. They were the watchtowers, they were the hunting blinds. And high up, on a massive horizontal branch, a branch as thick as a man's body, the marsupial lion would wait. It would not pace like a restless caged cat. It would lie, its heavy, low-slung and immensely powerful body held flat against the rough, mottled bark. Its dappled, shaggy fur would have made it a living part of the tree, a grotesque, pouched and silent gargoyle, indistinguishable from the shadows and the clumps of mistletoe. It would be a creature of profound, almost reptilian patience, a 200-pound shadow waiting for the world to come to it. Its vantage point was perfect. Below it, the Diprotodon highways, the paths carved by the ponderous giants, snaked through the forest. This was the road to the waterhole, the one inevitable path that all life in this dry, thirsty land had to take. The thylacoleo did not need to search for its prey. It simply waited for its prey to be delivered. And then a sound, the dry snap of a twig, the heavy, muffled bipedal thud of the walking kangaroo, Procoptodon, as it moved in its slow, browsing and naive confidence down the path. Or perhaps it was a juvenile Diprotodon, its heavy, shuffling gait a slow, rhythmic and vulnerable target. The creature above, its small, deep-set eyes locked on the victim, would not tense. It would simply shift. It would gather its immense, coiled, muscular haunches, its great, switchblade claws, the meat hooks on its thumbs, sliding silently from their sheaths. The victim passes beneath. The attack was not a graceful, soaring leap. It was a drop, a heavy, calculated and terrifying fall. A 200-pound executioner using the full, crushing force of gravity as its primary weapon. It would have landed in a jarring, heavy thump on the victim's back, a sudden, unbearable weight from a silent sky. And in that first, chaotic instant, the fight was already over. Before the kangaroo could even register the shock, those two enormous curving thumb claws would have sunk deep into its shoulders, anchoring the predator with a grip that no amount of bucking, no amount of desperate, panicked struggle could ever hope to dislodge. The thylacoleo was now part of it, a heavy, riding and inescapable death. Then, the execution. With the victim held fast, its spine pinned by the anchoring claws, the heavy bolt-cutter head was brought around. There was no struggle, no messy, suffocating bite to the throat, just a single, efficient and catastrophic application of force. The shearing incisors would have been applied to the neck, to the base of the skull. A single, sharp and powerful snap. The sound of shearing bone, of a severed spinal cord, and then only the heavy, collapsing weight of the victim. The evidence for this is not just speculation. In the dark, silent caves that were these creatures' dens, we find the bones of their prey. We find the vertebrae of giant kangaroos, marked with the clean, precise, and unmistakable V shapes of a thylacoleo's bite. It was a preferred, practiced, and efficient kill. This, then, was the true terror of the marsupial lion. It was not just a hunter, it was an arboreal assassin. It was a creature that made the very air, the very shadows of the high canopy, a source of sudden and final death. It was the mammalian apex, a master of the vertical ambush. But it was not the only pouched killer in this strange and competitive land. It had a rival that ignored the trees and instead perfected a different and perhaps more relentless kind of hunt. It was the hunter that did not wait. It was the ghost that followed. The marsupial lion was a creature of the vertical, a specialist in the terrible, explosive and gravitational ambush. It was a predator of profound, concentrated power. But this continent, this vast, isolated and competitive laboratory, had produced more than one solution to the problem of predation. It had another, quieter, and perhaps even more relentless pouched killer. This creature ignored the trees. It had no interest in the ambush. Its weapon was not the bolt-cutter jaw, nor the anchoring claw. Its weapon was time. This was Thylacinus, the ghost hunter. We know this creature from the sad, grainy, black and white footage of the last caged survivors in the 20th century. The Tasmanian tiger, a shy, nervous and almost pathetic creature, pacing its concrete cell. We must erase that image from our minds. That was a ghost, a tiny, inbred and relic population, clinging to the last cold edge of the world. The prehistoric Thylacinus was a different beast entirely. This was a larger, more robust, and more confident animal, a wolf-sized predator that hunted the great open eucalyptus forests of the mainland. Its body was a living contradiction. It had the head of a dog, the lean, efficient flanks of a wolf, and the stiff, almost kangaroo-like tail of a marsupial. Its back was painted with those dark, hypnotic and beautiful stripes. And its jaw was its own strange, alien specialization. It was not a jaw of power, but of capacity. It could open to a near impossible 90-degree gape, a maw designed not to crush, but to engulf. This was not a creature of power, it was a creature of persistence. It was an endurance hunter, a four-legged marathon runner, a living engine of aerobic efficiency. And its hunt was not a battle. It was a quiet, relentless, and terrifying psychological unraveling. The hunt would begin at dusk. As the blue, oily haze of the eucalyptus forest turned a deep, bruised purple, the Thylacinus would rise from its den. It would select its prey, perhaps a mid-sized kangaroo or a wallaby. It would not stalk, it would not sprint, it would simply appear. The kangaroo, sensing the presence, would bound away, a frantic, explosive burst of speed. The Thylacinus would not follow in kind. It would simply lower its head and begin to move. It would begin its own strange, shuffling and metronomic trot, a pace that was not fast, but which was, in its very essence, unbreakable. It was a pace it could maintain for hours, perhaps for a day. The kangaroo would stop, miles later, its sides heaving, its burst of panicked energy spent. It would turn, and in the deepening gloom, it would see it, the hunter. Not closer perhaps, but still there, still coming, still moving at that same relentless and unhurried pace. This is the calm chill of the Thylacinus. This is the terror of the ghost hunter. The prey is not killed by a sudden, violent shock. It is killed by the slow, dawning and inescapable certainty of its own death. It is the horror of the hunter that never, ever gives up. It is the nightmare of the creature that does not tire, that does not sleep, that does not get distracted. It is the predator as a form of pure, implacable and patient pursuit. The kangaroo bounds away again, and again, and again, and each time its bursts of speed become shorter, its recovery becomes longer. Its muscles, filled with the acid of its own panic, begin to fail, and each time it stops, each time it turns, the ghost is still there, still trotting, still coming. Finally, after hours of this, the kangaroo stumbles. It is utterly and completely exhausted. It can no longer lift its own heavy legs, and the Thylacinus, in contrast, is not even breathing hard. It is a perfect aerobic machine. It approaches its exhausted victim. The kill is not a battle, it is a formality. The wide, gaping jaw, that strange reptilian maw, opens. It is a quiet, almost surgical conclusion to a hunt that was won hours ago by the simple, profound and terrifying power of persistence. This, then, was the marsupial dynasty, the Thylacoleo and the Thylacinus, the lion and the wolf. One was the king of the vertical ambush, a specialist in explosive power. The other was the king of the horizontal pursuit, a specialist in relentless endurance. They were the apex of the pouched experiment, the two magnificent warm-blooded solutions to the problem of the kill. They were the royalty, the masters of this isolated continental larder. But their entire kingdom, their entire million-year reign, was built on a single, naive, and ultimately false assumption. They believed they were the apex. They were not. In the silent, sun-baked world of the waterhole, in the shadows that both of these marsupial kings were forced to drink from, a different, older, and far colder dynasty was watching. A dynasty of scale, of armor, and of venom. The true danger of this continent did not have a pouch. It did not have fur, it had scales, and its shadow, when it fell upon the land, would blot out the sun. The pouched kings, the lion and the ghost, were the masters of the warm-blooded hunt. They were the brilliant, specialized and successful products of this isolated mammalian laboratory. They reigned at the top of their own, furred and pouched, food chain. But their kingdom was a shared one, and they were not the true, undisputed monarchs of this burning continent. Their entire world, their entire existence, was built around the thin, precarious and muddy ribbons of water that gave the land life. And these waterholes, these oases of desperate congregation, did not belong to them. They belonged to an older, colder, and far more patient dynasty. They were the domain of the reptile. The marsupial predators, for all their power, were still creatures of the night, of the cool, dappled forest. But when the great, white and punishing sun of the Australian midday reached its zenith, when the air shimmered with a heat that drove all warm-blooded life into the shadows, a different and greater shadow would fall upon the land. It would begin as a sense of wrongness, a movement at the edge of the dry riverbed, a shape that at first seemed to be a log or a ridge of dark sun-baked earth. But this log would move. It would move with a slow, silent, and fluid grace that belied its impossible, terrifying scale. This was Meiolania, Varanus priscus, the ancient giant monitor. We must erase the image of a fast, clumsy, and thundering monster. We must instead imagine a creature of profound reptilian patience and of a cold alien intelligence. This was a lizard, a goanna, scaled up to the size of a large automobile. It was a 7-meter, 1-ton predator, a low-slung, armor-plated and walking engine of death. Its presence would have changed the very quality of the light at the waterhole. It would have been an atmosphere of pure, cold terror. When Meiolania was present, all other life would have frozen. The herds of Diprotodon would have backed away from the water. The walking kangaroos would have stood, paralyzed, their large, dark eyes fixed on the shadow. Even the marsupial lion, the great arboreal executioner, would have given this creature a wide, silent, and respectful birth. This was the true apex. This was the super predator. It would move with a slow, deliberate, and almost arrogant confidence, its massive, clawed feet gripping the earth, its heavy, muscular tail swaying in a slow reptilian rhythm. Its head, a heavy reptilian block, would lift, its forked black and glistening tongue tasting the air, reading the chemical story of the world, sensing the fear of the creatures huddled at the bank. Its hunt was not a chase, it was a choice. It would select its victim, perhaps a zygomaturus, the marsupial hippo, wallowing in the cooling mud. And it would begin its slow, relentless and shuffling walk. It was a creature that, in its very essence, broadcasted a message of pure, unassailable, and cold dominance. Its bite was its weapon, its mouth was a serrated reptilian saw blade. But the true, insidious and calm chill horror of this creature was not in the teeth themselves. It was in the chemical, biological and patient poison that they delivered. For this was not just a giant lizard, this was a dragon, and its true weapon was venom. The terror of this reptilian apex was not in a sudden, violent and explosive act of power. It was in the cold, slow and chemical patience of its kill. The mouth of Meiolania was a weapon, its serrated teeth designed to tear, to rip, to open a deep, grievous and ragged wound. But this physical wound, for all its horror, was merely the delivery system. The true weapon was invisible. It was the poison. This was not the lightning-fast, neurotoxic venom of an inland taipan, a poison designed for a quick, convulsive death. This was a different and perhaps more terrifying philosophy of predation. This was a venom of systems, a complex alchemical cocktail, a liquid infection designed not to end the hunt, but to guarantee its outcome, regardless of the time it took. When the giant lizard struck, its bite was a chemical injection. Its venom, a potent and sophisticated brew, was released into the wound. It was a cocktail of horrors. It was a powerful anticoagulant, a substance that destroyed the blood's ability to clot, ensuring that the wound, once opened, would never, ever seal. It was a hypertensive, a chemical that caused a sudden, catastrophic and cascading drop in the victim's blood pressure. And it was a paralytic, a toxin that induced a state of profound systemic shock, weakening the muscles, clouding the senses, and beginning the slow internal unraveling of the victim's very consciousness. This was a hunt of profound reptilian patience. We must imagine the scene at the waterhole. The Meiolania makes its slow, deliberate and shuffling lunge. It seizes the leg of a Diprotodon in its saw-toothed jaws. The giant, furred wombat-rhino, in a massive 4-ton surge of panic and adrenaline, rears back, tearing its flesh free from the lizard's grip. It is wounded, bleeding, but it is alive. It is free, and it crashes in a blind terror through the acacia scrub, leaving its attacker behind. The Meiolania does not give chase. It does not waste a single calorie of its cold-blooded energy. It simply stands, impassive, its heavy-lidded ancient eyes watching the giant flee. It lifts its great reptilian head, and its black forked tongue tastes the air. The hunt, it knows, is already over. The Diprotodon runs for a mile, for 2, but something is wrong. The wound in its leg, the deep, ragged and open gash, is not closing. The blood, now chemically forbidden from clotting, continues to pour, a dark, hot and constant stream. Its massive, warm-blooded heart, the very engine of its escape, is now its own greatest enemy, pumping its lifeblood out onto the red, dry earth. And then the second stage begins. The venom, the hypertensive, takes hold. The creature's world begins to spin. A profound systemic dizziness, a calm chill settles over its brain. Its massive tree-trunk legs, the pillars of its ponderous, giant body, begin to tremble. It stumbles, its body overwhelmed by a weakness that has not been earned by exertion. It collapses, its 4-ton frame crashing to the earth, not with a roar, but with a low, confused and terrified groan. It is not dead, it is simply undone. And perhaps an hour later, perhaps a day, the shadow returns. The Meiolania, its patient, cold-blooded metabolism demanding nothing of it, has been following the trail. Not just the trail of blood, but the chemical, venom-laced scent of its own, dying victim. It moves with the same slow, deliberate and shuffling gait. It finds its prize, the mountain of flesh, still breathing but paralyzed, helpless and waiting. This was the true power of the shadow on the land. It was a power of chemical certainty, of a death that was slow, patient, and absolutely inevitable. This cold-blooded, venomous dominance was the defining terror of the dry plains. But the reptilian nightmare was not confined to a single form. In the woodlands and river systems, another, equally terrifying and far more active reptilian predator had perfected a different and more shocking kind of hunt. It was a predator that had learned to gallop. The venomous dragon Meiolania was a creature of cold, chemical, and patient terror. It was a specialist in the slow, inevitable, and sapping death. But the reptilian dynasty of this burning continent was not a one-note symphony of horror. It was a laboratory of terrifying, specialized, and successful designs. The land, in its isolated, evolutionary dream, had produced another, equally formidable, and perhaps even more viscerally frightening, reptilian apex. This was a nightmare that did not wait. It did not poison. It did not ambush from the water. It chased. We are conditioned by a deep ancestral memory to understand the shape of a crocodile. It is a creature of the water's edge, a log of pure, submerged and explosive potential. It is a being of the ambush, its entire, perfect 200-million-year-old design built for the single, violent and lunging snap from a liquid concealment. The Australian continent, in its terrible ingenuity, took this perfect aquatic blueprint and it brought it ashore. It created Quincana, the terrestrial galloping crocodile. This was not a creature of the swamp. This was a creature of the woodland, of the dry, open eucalyptus forest. It was a predator that had divorced itself from the water and had evolved to compete directly on the open plains with the marsupial lion and the ghost hunter. Its body was not the flattened, pancake-like form of its aquatic cousins, a shape designed for hydrodynamic stealth. Its body was taller, its legs longer, and, most terrifyingly, positioned underneath its body, not splayed out to the sides. This was an architecture of efficiency, an architecture built for running, perhaps for a sustained pounding and reptilian gallop. And its teeth were not the conical, interlocking spikes of a water hunter, teeth designed to grasp and to drown. The teeth of Quincana were different. They were flattened, serrated, and blade-like, like the teeth of a tyrannosaur. These were not the teeth of a grappler. These were the teeth of a flesh cutter, a dismemberer. We must now create a new image in our minds, a new kind of terror. We must imagine the walking kangaroo, Procoptodon, striding with its heavy bipedal gait through the hazy blue-lit forest. It is wary, its large, dark eyes scanning the high branches for the shadow of the thylacoleo. It is listening, its large ears pivoting, for the relentless, shuffling trot of the thylacinus on its trail. It is looking for the wrong danger. From the shaded, dappled thicket, a different hunter explodes. It is not a warm-blooded, furred predator. It is a 9-foot, scaly and armor-plated reptile, its body held high, its legs pounding the dry, red earth in a shocking, powerful and galloping burst of speed. It is a crocodile, on land, running, and its reptilian, impassive and ancient eyes are fixed on its prey. This was the true chaotic and terrifying nature of this continent. It was a place of overlapping, nightmarish competition. A marsupial kangaroo, an animal that is already a strange, bipedal experiment, is being chased by a terrestrial, galloping crocodile, while being stalked by a pouched, bolt-cutter-jawed lion. This was a level of predation, a density of specialized killers that existed nowhere else on Earth. The galloping crocodile was a fast, shocking and active hunter, a creature that brought the reptilian terror directly into the mammalian world. It was a master of the woodland chase, but the older, more traditional reptilian nightmare, the specialist of the waterhole ambush, had not vanished. It was still there, and in this land of giants, it too had evolved to a scale that was almost beyond comprehension. The galloping crocodile, Quincana, was a creature of shocking, active, and terrestrial violence. It was a reptile that had learned to hunt like a mammal, a monster that had left the water behind. But this continent, this ancient laboratory, did not abandon its older, more primal nightmares. It simply refined them. The waterhole, that central, sacred and terrifying stage, was not just the domain of the lizard and the crocodile. It was the hunting ground of an even older and more patient form of predator. This was the serpent. When we think of giant snakes, we think of the python or the anaconda, a creature of muscular, crushing and familiar power. But prehistoric Australia, in its profound isolation, held a different and far older lineage. This was a snake from a forgotten dynasty, a survivor of a family known as the Madtsoidae, a group of primitive serpents that had once haunted the age of the dinosaurs, and which had found their final, magnificent refuge here. This was Wanambi, the Serpent King. This was not a creature of speed. It was a creature of pure, colossal and patient ambush. It was a 5-meter, thick-bodied and heavy column of muscle, a constrictor of a different, more archaic design. Its skull was not the flexible, hyperkinetic and unhinging skull of a modern python, a design built to swallow immense prey. Its skull was more rigid, more solid, a more primitive architecture. It was a hunter of a different and perhaps more limited gape. It was not a creature that could swallow a Diprotodon whole. It was, instead, a specialist in the ambush. We must imagine it. It did not hunt in the dry forest. Its entire cold-blooded and patient existence was spent in the cool, dark and still water of the permanent billabongs, the deep, isolated pools that were the continent's last refuge. It would lie, submerged, its entire massive body a dark, coiled and invisible shadow on the muddy floor. Only its head, its impassive, reptilian eyes, would break the surface, disguised as a piece of floating dead wood, a dark, unmoving knot on the water's skin. It was a living, breathing and sentient trap, and its patience was absolute. It was a patience born of a cold-blooded metabolism, a creature that could wait, unmoving, for a week, for a month, for the single, perfect and unsuspecting moment. A wallaby, or perhaps a Procoptodon, the giant walking kangaroo, would approach. Driven by the continental thirst, it would lower its heavy, short-muzzled head to the water's edge. The explosion was instantaneous. It was not a chase, it was a lunge. The water's surface would shatter, and the dark, heavy and muscular coil would erupt, its rigid, backward-curving teeth sinking deep into the victim's face and neck. And in the same fluid and terrible motion, the rest of the body would follow, a thick, muscular and living rope, coiling with a crushing hydraulic power around the kangaroo's chest, its arms, its neck. The kill was not a bite. It was an embrace, a slow, methodical and suffocating pressure, a living vice that did not break bones, but simply, relentlessly and quietly extinguished the breath. It was the ancient, silent and suffocating terror of the waterhole. The Wanambi was the undisputed master of this slow, constricting and submerged ambush. It was a giant, primitive and terrifyingly successful hunter. But it was not the only giant hunter in these waters. It was not the only creature that waited, disguised as a floating log. For all its power, the Serpent King was forced to share its dark, muddy and life-giving kingdom. It shared its throne with another, far more powerful and even more ancient, reptilian monarch. It shared the water with the true tyrant of the river. The Serpent King, Wanambi, was a creature of profound, primitive and patient terror. It was a silent, constricting horror, a living snare that waited in the muddy, still waters of the billabong. But its rule was not absolute. Its ancient, suffocating embrace was but one kind of death that this continent had perfected. The waterhole, that sacred, central and life-giving stage, was a shared throne, and it was ruled by a monarch of a different, more ancient and far more brutal dynasty. This was a creature that had been designed by 200 million years of evolutionary perfection. It was a design that was already ancient before the first mammals had ever evolved, a blueprint of pure, explosive and aquatic power. This was the crocodile, and in this land of giants, it too had grown to a scale of impossible, monstrous and tyrannical proportions. We must imagine a creature far larger, far heavier and far more powerful than even the most formidable modern saltwater crocodile. This was Palimnarchus, the all-ruling crocodile, a true tyrant of the river system. This was not a subtle hunter. It was a 10-meter multi-ton engine of pure, explosive and hydrostatic force. Its skull was not the rigid, primitive architecture of the Wanambi. It was a broad, heavy and massively reinforced fortress of bone, driven by muscles so powerful they could generate a bite force that was not a bite, but a geological event. Its teeth were not the simple backward-curving hooks of a constrictor. They were deep, conical and deeply rooted spikes, designed not just to hold, but to shatter the thick, prehistoric bone of the giants it hunted. This creature was the waterhole. It did not hide within it, it simply occupied it. It was a living, armored and impassive log, a ridge of scaly, ancient armor floating with a patience that was absolute, its dark, reptilian eyes the only part of it that seemed alive. It was the troll under the bridge, the gatekeeper of the elixir of life, and it extracted a terrible, bloody toll on every creature that dared to approach. The Wanambi was a specialist in the kangaroo-sized prey. Palimnarchus was a specialist in the absolute. We must imagine the scene. The great, ponderous, 4-ton Diprotodon, the wombat-rhino, is driven by the continental thirst. It shuffles with its heavy, fearless and naive gait to the water's edge. It is a mountain of flesh, a creature whose very bulk is its defense, a being that has no predator on the dry land. It lowers its massive, shaggy head to the surface of the pool. The explosion is an apocalypse. The water itself, the placid, life-giving surface, detonates. It is not a lunge, it is a breach. A multi-ton, armor-plated missile, propelled by the most powerful tail in the animal kingdom, erupts from the depths. The sound is a wet, percussive, and deafening crash. The jaws of the river tyrant, those bone-shattering spikes, clamp down on the head, the throat, or the leg of the giant, and then the true, terrible power of this dynasty is unleashed. The Palimnarchus begins to roll. This is the death roll, a vortex of pure, rotational, and dismembering torque. It is a force designed to negate the very concept of strength. The Diprotodon, for all its 4 tons of muscle and bone, is helpless. It is an act of pure, brutal, and efficient physics. The crocodile spins, its entire massive and powerful body a living propeller, and the giant furred body of the marsupial titan is torn apart, dismembered in the churning, bloody, and muddy water. This was the true, inescapable horror of prehistoric Australia. It was a land of profound, concentric, and overlapping dangers. To survive, a creature had to be a master of its own element. The Diprotodon was the king of the dry, open forest. But to live, it had to enter the world of the river tyrant. And in that world, it was not a king, it was food. This was the terrible reptilian blockade that defined the continent. The land was ruled by the venomous shadow of Meiolania. The water was ruled by the explosive, bone-shattering terror of Palimnarchus. It was a continent held hostage, a kingdom pinned between the dragon and the deep. The great giants, the lumbering, slow-moving titans of this reptilian dynasty, had claimed the ground and the water. They were the masters of the horizontal plane. But this continent's capacity for reptilian danger was not so limited. The land, in its endless competitive laboratory, had not just created giants. It had also, in a final, insidious twist, made the danger three-dimensional. The reptilian threat was not just on the ground or in the water, it was also in the trees. The reptilian dynasty had locked the continent in a grip of cold, ancient terror. The ground, the dry, sun-baked plains, belonged to the venomous shadow of Meiolania. The water, the precious muddy lifeblood of the billabongs, was the execution block of the river tyrant Palimnarchus. The giants of this world were pinned horizontally between these two colossal and inescapable nightmares. It would be a comfort then to imagine that there was an escape, that there was a refuge, that the high canopy, the vertical world of the great eucalyptus trees, was a safe mammalian kingdom. This was the hunting blind of the thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, a warm-blooded, pouched assassin. It would be a comfort to believe that this arboreal world was its own, uncontested and safe domain. But this continent, this isolated reptilian laboratory, did not permit such simple refuges. The danger here was not just horizontal, it was three-dimensional. The reptilian dynasty did not just produce giants, It produced specialists. And in the warm, dappled and hazy light of the high branches, a different kind of monitor was hunting. These were the smaller cousins of Meiolania, but small is a relative term. These were tree goannas, devil dragons, that were in themselves formidable, 6-foot and powerful predators. They possessed the same ancient and reptilian toolkit, the armored, scaly hide, the serrated, flesh-tearing teeth, and the same insidious, septic, or perhaps truly venomous bite. But they had coupled this with a profound and terrifying new skill. They could climb. Their claws were not the heavy grappling hooks of their giant ground-dwelling cousin. They were sharp, deeply recurved, and perfect anchors, designed to grip the vertical armored bark of the eucalyptus. Their bodies were lighter, more slender, more serpentine, their balance perfect. They were masters of the high canopy, moving with a silent, fluid and reptilian grace that the heavy, muscular and mammalian Thylacoleo could never hope to match. We must now create a final, chilling and complex image of predation. Imagine the Thylacoleo, the pouched lion, lying in its patient, silent ambush on a high branch, its deep-set eyes scanning the forest floor below, waiting for the heavy, shuffling gait of a Diprotodon calf. It is waiting, but it is also being watched. On the same branch, 10 feet behind it, another, colder and more ancient pair of eyes is also waiting. A 6-foot reptilian shadow, a devil dragon, is moving with a silence that is absolute. It is stalking the apex mammalian predator. It is a cold-blooded, venomous and reptilian assassin invading the warm-blooded pouched assassin's own private vertical kingdom. This was the true, inescapable and layered horror of prehistoric Australia. It was a world where every niche, every element, every dimension held its own specialized and reptilian death. There was no refuge. The ground was a venomous trap. The water was a crushing vortex. And the very air, the high, sunlit canopy, was home to a silent, climbing and reptilian dragon. These were the great macroscopic and obvious dangers. They were the giants, the tyrants, the monsters that defined the age. But the true, enduring and most insidious genius of this continent's danger was not in the colossal. It was not in the loud, explosive and bone-shattering attack. The real, permanent and defining danger of this land was something else. It was something quiet. It was something small. It was something that hid in the cracks, in the leaf litter, and in the very water itself. It was the cryptic peril. It was the age of venom. The giants are the obvious, cinematic horrors. The venomous shadow of Meiolania, the bone-shattering roll of Palimnarchus, the galloping reptilian chase of Quincana. They are the loud dangers, the colossal, walking nightmares that define the terror of this lost continent. But these monsters, for all their power, are a fragile story. They are a story of size, a story that depends on a very specific, stable, and abundant food chain of other, equally colossal giants. When that food chain collapsed, they too would vanish into the red dust. The true, enduring, and perhaps most insidious danger of prehistoric Australia was not this loud terror. It was a quieter, more patient, and far more permanent kind of threat. It was a danger that did not rely on size, but on chemistry. It was the cryptic, hidden, and venomous peril that was born in the shadows of these giants, and which would outlive them all. To understand this, we must return one last time to the heart of this entire brutal world. We must go back to the waterhole. This was the crucible. It was the single, non-negotiable point of contact for every living thing on the continent. It was a forced, desperate, and daily congregation. Here, the 4-ton Diprotodon, the venomous Meiolania, the pouched Thylacoleo, the galloping Quincana, the giant walking kangaroo, and the armored Meiolania were all forced to stand side by side in a tense, terrible, and unavoidable truce. This was the most intense, competitive, and predator-rich environment that has perhaps ever existed. And in this pressure cooker, being small was a profound and almost always fatal disadvantage. In this world of giants, to be small was to be stepped on, to be ignored, to be a victim. Unless you had a deterrent. In this world, a small creature could not win a fight with strength. It had no chance against the crushing reptilian jaws or the heavy marsupial feet. It had to evolve a different kind of power. It had to evolve a power that was disproportionate to its size. It had to invent the great equalizer. It had to invent venom. In this crowded, terrifying, and desperate arena of the waterhole, a bite from a small, non-venomous snake was an irritation. A bite from a small venomous snake was a crisis. A small brown spider in the leaf litter was a minor inconvenience. A small, brown, and neurotoxic spider was a fatal misstep. This, then, is the secret of modern Australia. The reason the continent is to this day overflowing with the most potent and deadly venoms on the planet is not an accident. It is a legacy. It is a living chemical memory of the time of giants. The venoms of the modern taipans, the brown snakes, and the death adders were not evolved to kill mice. They were forged in a million-year arms race against the thick, tough, and resilient hides of giant marsupials and the cold, ancient blood of reptilian tyrants. When the megafauna died, when the great Diprotodon and the giant kangaroos vanished, the loud predators that depended on them, Meiolania, Thylacoleo, vanished with them. Their specialization was too narrow, their size too costly. But the quiet predators, the small cryptic and chemical assassins, did not. Their food source, the smaller mammals, the frogs, the lizards, was still there. But they carried with them into the modern world the apocalyptic, supercharged, and giant-killing venom that they had perfected in that ancient, lost, and far more dangerous world. The giants are gone, but their chemical ghosts remain. And in the leaf litter of that ancient forest, other, equally venomous and far more numerous hunters were perfecting their own ancient and terrifying societies. The venomous legacy of this ancient continent was not just a story of snakes. It was being written simultaneously in a different, silken and eight-legged script. The very ground, the damp, dark and rustling carpet of the forest floor was not a path. It was a minefield. The cryptic peril was not just a chemical, but an arachnid. Here, in the cool, moist earth beneath the roots of the giant, oily eucalyptus, another kind of hunter perfected its own, insidious and subterranean trap. This was the ancestor of the modern funnel web spider, a creature that is, even today, a living fossil of prehistoric potency. It did not chase. It did not stalk. It built a home of pure white and treacherous silk, a tube that descended into a cold, dark and silent parlor, and it waited. Its world was not one of sight, but of pure lethal vibration. Its 8 delicate and hair-covered legs rested on the silken threads of its doorway, a living seismic array, a trap tuned to the faint, clumsy and doomed footsteps of a passing lizard or a small pouched mammal. The slightest tremor, the slightest brush against the tripwire, and the spider would explode from the earth, a flash of dark, glistening and venomous fury. In the drier, warmer soils, a different and more brutish specialist resided. The great, heavy-bodied tarantulas, the whistling spiders, the ancestors of the so-called bird-eaters. These were not weavers of delicate snares. These were living, hairy and formidable tanks. They were burrowers, their dens a deep, vertical shaft. Their fangs were not small, surgical needles. They were 2 large, black and downward striking daggers, tools of pure, physical and grappling power. They were a miniature 8-legged Thylacoleo of the underworld, a cryptic, fist-sized and venomous brute. These spiders, the funnel web and the tarantula, were the masters of the solitary ambush. Their venoms, like those of the snakes, were forged in this same high-stakes predatory crucible, a chemical arsenal designed for a world of giants. Their lives were a patient, lonely, and venomous vigil. But this dark, rich, and competitive kingdom of the leaf litter was not just a stage for lone assassins. It was also the territory of a far more numerous, a more ancient, and a socially organized collective terror. The spiders shared their hunting ground with an armored, stinging, and relentless legion. The cryptic peril of this continent was not just a story of the solitary, patient, and silent ambush. The spider in its silken tube, the snake in its venomous coil, these were lone assassins. But the forest floor, that rich, deep, and rustling carpet of 100 million years, was also the domain of a collective, a legion, a moving, armored, and stinging embodiment of the land's ancient chemical hostility. This was the kingdom of the ant, but this was not the ant of our own familiar world. This was not a small, blind, and anonymous scavenger, a cog in a vast, subterranean, pheromone-driven machine. This was Meiolania, the bulldog ant, and it is perhaps the most perfect, living, and aggressive ghost of that ancient prehistoric terror. This is not an ant as we know it. It is a living fossil, a creature that is, in its very essence, a wasp that has forgotten how to fly. It is a primitive, solitary, and monstrously successful design, a creature that walked the forest floor alongside the Diprotodon and the marsupial lion, and which, unlike them, has survived almost unchanged. To look at one is to see a different, older, and more brutal philosophy of the ant. It is a giant of its kind, an armored, inch-long, and relentless predator. Its head is not a small, blind node. It is a massive, armored capsule dominated by two huge and unnervingly sharp compound eyes. This ant does not just sense its world, it sees it. It watches. Its jaws are not the small, gripping mandibles of a modern worker. They are two long, serrated, and powerful sickles held open like a bear trap, a weapon that is, in itself, a testament to the continent's arms race. And at its rear, it carries the weapon that defines it. It does not just bite, it stings. It possesses a long, powerful, and hypodermic stinger, a direct evolutionary inheritance from its wasp ancestors, and it is a stinger that it uses with a chilling, calculated, and ferocious efficiency. This is not a scavenger. This is a solitary hunter, a tiger of the leaf litter. It does not follow chemical trails. It stalks. We must imagine it. Its large, intelligent eyes scanning the forest floor, its armored, reddish-black body held high, its massive, trap-like jaws held open. It will see its prey, a spider, a beetle, another ant, and it will not swarm it. It will chase it. It will run it down, its movements a blur of specialized, jointed aggression. It will even leap, a sudden, explosive, and directed jump to close the final distance. And when it seizes its victim, the kill is a terrifying two-part act. The great serrated jaws snap shut, impaling and holding the prey fast. And as it is held, the long, muscular abdomen curls under, and the great venomous stinger is driven in, once, twice, again and again. The venom is its true prehistoric legacy. It is not a simple irritant. It is a complex chemical cocktail, one of the most potent and agonizing venoms in the entire insect world. It is a liquid fire, a neurotoxin designed not just to kill, but to punish, to create a memory of such excruciating pain that no predator will ever attempt to eat one twice. It is a chemical scream, a direct, painful, and living echo of the time of giants, a venom forged in a world where every single living thing was a potential mortal threat. This, then, was the true, deep, and permanent danger of prehistoric Australia. It was a world where the giants, the Meiolania, the Palimnarchus, were the loud peril, and where the small, the snakes, the spiders, and this ancient, stinging and sharp-eyed ant were the cryptic peril. It was a continent of overlapping, layered, and inescapable threat. This was the laboratory, a perfect, isolated and balanced ecosystem, a million-year-old machine running on its own, strange, internal and hostile logic. It was a world of pouched lions, walking kangaroos, galloping crocodiles, and venomous dragons. It was a world that had evolved in a perfect, hermetic seal. But this isolation, this long, ancient, and dreamlike solitude, was not forever. The seal was about to be broken. After 50 million years of evolving in its own strange and terrible image, this continent, this lost world, was about to receive its first and its last outside visitor. A new kind of predator was coming, a predator that was not a reptile, not a marsupial, not a giant. It was a creature of fire, of the spear, and of a new and profoundly disruptive kind of mind. The great silence was about to fall. The continent of Sahul, this vast, isolated and hostile laboratory, was a perfect, self-contained and ancient machine. It was a world in a state of profound, million-year-old equilibrium. The pouched lions hunted the giant wombats, the venomous dragons stalked the waterholes, and the cryptic, chemical peril of the forest floor kept the small in check. This was a world that knew its own, brutal and unchanging rules. But this isolation, this long 50 million year old dream, was finally and irrevocably coming to an end. Across the warm, blue and treacherous seas to the north, a different kind of evolution had been taking place. On the great, connected continents of Africa and Asia, a new kind of mind had been forged, a consciousness born not of isolation, but of relentless global competition. And now, this mind, this new and profoundly different kind of being, was learning to cross the water. They did not arrive in a great, conquering armada. They did not come with the sound of trumpets or the clash of steel. They arrived as a whisper, perhaps a single, small family, carried on a simple, woven raft, a vessel of pure, audacious hope, pushed by a storm, or by a dream, or by a simple, curious, and unthinking drift. They were, in their physical form, unimpressive. They were small, soft-skinned, and vulnerable. They had no pouch. They had no venom. They had no armor. They landed, perhaps 65,000 years ago, on the northern tropical shores of this new and terrifying continent. They were the first Australians, and they carried with them two things that this ancient, isolated world had never, ever seen before. They carried a new and profoundly collaborative kind of intelligence, and they carried a new and profoundly different kind of fire. The continent, of course, knew fire. It had been born of it. The fire of this land was a geological force, a wild, elemental and chaotic event, a wall of flame born from a random lightning strike. It was a fire that consumed, that sterilized, that erased. The fire that these new, small, soft-skinned mammals carried was not a force. It was a tool. It was a fire that was not wild, but tamed. It was a fire that lived at the end of a stick. It was a fire that could be carried, that could be controlled, that could be created at will. This was not a fire of chaos. It was a fire of intention. As these first small and profoundly intelligent groups began to move, to explore this new and giant-filled land, they brought this tool with them, and this small, hand-held intentional flame was a weapon more powerful, more disruptive, and more transformative than all the venomous fangs and crushing jaws of the reptilian dynasty combined. This was the fire that would, in time, unmake this ancient, isolated world. It was the fire that would, quite literally, burn the age of giants to the ground. This new creature, this soft-skinned, upright and vulnerable mammal, should have been an easy meal. In the brutal, unforgiving calculus of prehistoric Australia, it was a walking, physical liability. It had no claws for climbing, no bolt-cutter jaws for crushing, no venom for a cryptic kill, and no armor for defense. By all the rules of this ancient, isolated world, it should have been erased in a single bloody generation, a failed, foolish experiment. But this creature did not play by the old rules. It had brought its own. Its primary weapon was not physical, it was abstract. It was the group. It was the shared, collaborative and predictive mind. A single human was a victim. A group of 20 humans, all moving with a single shared and communicated plan, was a force this continent had never, ever seen. And this mind, this collective consciousness, had forged new external weapons, extensions of its own, collaborative will. The first was the spear. This was not just a sharp stick. It was a projectile. It was the mastery of a new and revolutionary concept, the ability to kill at a distance. The Thylacoleo had to drop from a tree, its kill a close, crushing, and high-risk embrace. The Meiolania had to deliver its venom with a personal, flesh-tearing bite. The Palimnarchus had to seize its prey in a wet, churning, and intimate vortex. These new small predators did not need to touch their prey to kill it. They could stand in relative safety, 50, perhaps 100 feet away, and hurl their intention, their sharp, fire-hardened and stone-tipped points through the air. We must imagine a hunt, a herd of Procoptodon, the giant, hoof-toed walking kangaroos. They are wary, their large, dark eyes scanning the high branches for the marsupial lion. They are listening, their ears pivoting for the reptilian gallop of the quincana. They are, as they have been for 1,000,000 years, prepared for the predators they know. They are not prepared for this. From the dry, scrubby acacias, a new sound, a sharp, whistling thwack, and a sharp, sudden, and inexplicable pain in the flank. A second and a third, not one hunter, but a volley. The herd, in its confusion, in its naive, unevolved terror, turns to flee. But there is no single attacker to flee from. There is a semicircle of small, upright and shouting figures, a coordinated, intelligent, and inescapable net. This was a hunt not of power, but of geometry, of planning, of a shared, murderous intellect. But the true landscape-scale weapon, the one that would unmake this entire world, was the fire. They did not just hunt the animal, they hunted the landscape. They used their tamed, controlled, and intentional fire to remake the continent in their own image. This was Firest-stick farming. Imagine the scene. A small, coordinated group moves along a ridge, overlooking a dry, grass-filled valley where a herd of Diprotodon is browsing. They do not descend. They simply, with a casual, almost godlike application of their fire sticks, light the upwind edge of the valley. A wall of smoke and flame, not a wild, chaotic inferno, but a controlled, calculated, and relentless curtain begins to move. The Diprotodon, with no evolved fear of this strategic, organized threat, are simply pushed. They are not attacked. They are herded by a wall of fire. They are driven, in their slow, ponderous, and growing panic, toward the one, single, open, and unburning escape route at the valley's end. And here, in this pre-planned, narrow, and inescapable corridor, the rest of the hunters are waiting. The trap is sprung. This was a form of predation that the slow, naive, and isolated megafauna had no evolutionary answer for. This was not a hunt, it was a harvest. This new, small, and soft-skinned creature, with its mind, its group, its spear, and its fire, did not just join the food chain. It shattered it. It became the continent's first, and its last, super predator. This new, terrifying and transformative force was so profound, so absolute, that it did not just leave its mark in the fossil record. It burned its way into the very cultural memory of the land itself, a story that might still be whispered, a faint pigmented echo on the silent stone canvases of the ancient rock. This new super predator, this small, soft-skinned and fire-wielding mammal, was not just a hunter. It was a witness. It was the continent's first and only chronicler, the only being with a mind complex enough to remember, to record and to process the profound, terrifying and giant-filled world it had just entered. The sheer, visceral and foundational shock of this encounter, of sharing a world with walking kangaroos, pouched lions, and venomous, car-sized dragons, was too profound to be forgotten. It was an experience that would burn itself into the very core of this new creature's consciousness. It was a memory that had to be passed down, and so they created a new kind of fossil record. It was not a record of bone preserved in stone. It was not a record of flesh preserved in amber. It was a record of memory preserved in story, in song, and in pigment. This is the dream time, the dreaming. It is not a collection of myths in the way we understand them, not simple, fanciful stories. It is a different kind of history, a deeper, cyclical, and spiritual truth, a map of the world, of its creation, and of its sacred, unchanging laws. It is a story that is alive. And the pages of this living story are the stone canvases of the continent itself. On the vast sandstone escarpments of Arnhem Land, on the ancient, silent rock faces of the Kimberley, these first people began to paint. They used the very blood of the continent, the red and yellow ochres, the white clay, to record their world, their laws and their memories. And here, in this vast 60,000-year-old library, we find the whispers, we find the ghosts. Among the paintings of modern kangaroos, of fish and of men, there are other, stranger and more ancient figures. There are paintings of a creature that has haunted the debate of science for decades. It is a giant, flightless bird. But it is not an emu. It is drawn with a strange, heavy and powerful-looking beak, a thick, muscular neck, and short, thick legs. It is a depiction that matches, with a chilling, simple accuracy, the fossil bones of Genyornis, the demon duck. This is a profound and calm, chill thought. We are not looking at a myth. We are looking at an eyewitness account. We are looking at a painting, a field guide, a wanted poster, drawn from life by a human hand 50,000 years ago. It is a portrait of a monster, a cultural memory of a hunt, a pigmented ochre echo of a creature that has been extinct for millennia. And if they painted the demon duck, what else did they paint? What else did they remember? The search becomes more speculative, more dreamlike, the whispers fainter. We search for the shadow of Meiolania, the 7-meter dragon. We search for the galloping crocodile, Quincana. And here, the evidence becomes tangled in the profound, sacred, and complex tapestry of the dreaming itself. We find, in the art and in the stories, the rainbow serpent. This is one of the most powerful, most ancient, and most universal of all the dreaming figures. It is a vast, reptilian, and creative god, a being of immense power, a serpent that is not just a serpent, but a force of nature. It is a creature that carves the rivers, that lives in the deepest waterholes, and that, in some traditions, is a being of both creation and of immense, terrifying danger. It is a haunting and perhaps unanswerable question. Is it possible that the origin of this vast, powerful, and reptilian god, this serpent that shapes the rivers and lives in the waterholes, is a faint, deep, and 50,000-year-old cultural memory of the true reptilian tyrants of that time? Is the rainbow serpent a spiritual echo of Meiolania, or Wanambi, or the river tyrant Palimnarchus? We cannot know. The ghost in the rock art is a faint, pigmented, and beautiful mystery. It is a line that blurs between zoology and theology, but it suggests a profound truth. It suggests that the first humans did not just see this world of giants. They lived in it, they fought it, and they remembered it. These faint ochre ghosts are the last fading record of this lost giant fauna, captured not by resin, but by the first, flickering and human consciousness. They are the stories of a world that was. But this new, intelligent and fire-wielding hunter was not the only force of change on the continent. The new super-predator had arrived at a time of profound geological stress. The world was already changing. The giants were already perhaps on their knees, weakened by a foe even more relentless and more ancient than the spear. They were being stalked by a foe they could not fight, a foe they could not even see. They were being hunted by the great continental thirst. The new, intelligent and fire-wielding predator was a profound, disruptive and revolutionary force. It was a mind that this ancient, naive continent had no evolutionary answer for. But the hunter, for all its deadly ingenuity, may not have been the executioner. It may have simply been the opportunist that arrived at the end of a much larger and far more impersonal execution. The giants, for all their power, were already in a world of profound geological trouble. The super predator had arrived at a time of deep systemic and planetary change. The continent was not just being hunted, it was dying. The world was growing colder. Far to the north and south, the great ice ages of the Pleistocene were in full glacial motion. Vast, continent-sized sheets of ice, miles thick, were locking up the planet's fresh water, pulling it from the oceans and the sky. The entire global climate was becoming drier, harsher, and more volatile. For a continent like Australia, a land already defined by its ancient, delicate, and desperate relationship with water, this global shift was not a challenge. It was a death sentence. The normal cycle of drought, the one the marsupial pouch had been so perfectly designed to endure, began to change. The droughts became longer. The rains became fainter, more fleeting, more spectral. The dry seasons stretched from years into decades, from decades into centuries. This was the arrival of the mega drought, a new, permanent and brutal reality that gripped the land and did not let go. The very heart of the continent began to fail. The vast, shallow inland seas, the great, life-giving lakes that had defined the interior, began to shrink. They turned from water to mud, to vast, sterile and shimmering salt pans, white, dry and dead. The sluggish, permanent river systems, the kingdoms of the Palimnarchus and the Wanambi, ceased to flow. They became chains of isolated, stagnant and evaporating pools. The waterhole, that sacred, central and life-giving linchpin of the entire ecosystem, was being erased. And as the water vanished, the food followed. The sclerophyll kingdom, that armored, hostile and just barely edible world of eucalyptus and acacia, began to fail. The plants, starved of water, could not support the sheer, massive and constant volume of food that the giants required. The leaves shriveled, their poisons concentrated, their nutrients vanished. The giants were trapped. Their very specialization, their immense, ponderous size, became their prison. The Diprotodon, that 4-ton furnace, needed a vast, continuous supply of low-quality fuel. When that fuel disappeared, its massive, slow and inefficient engine simply stopped. The walking kangaroos, the demon ducks, the hippo of the swamp, they were all tied to a world of abundance that was vanishing, turning to red dust and dry, thorny scrub before their very eyes. They were animals built for a stable, if harsh, world. Their low, slow marsupial reproductive rates, so brilliant at surviving a temporary fire or a short drought, were useless against a permanent, grinding and irreversible continental collapse. They were weak, they were starving, they were thirsty, they were trapped in shrinking, desperate and claustrophobic herds around the few final and muddy waterholes, their vast, powerful bodies now a liability. And it was into this world of the dying, this world of giants on their knees, that the other, new and hyper-adaptable predator arrived. The stage was not set for a battle. It was set for a funeral. The two great forces, the ancient geological thirst and the new intelligent fire, were about to meet, and in their meeting, the final, brutal and swift unraveling of this 50-million-year-old dream would begin. The end was not a single, clean and sudden event. It was not a solitary execution. It was an unraveling, a slow and then sudden pulling of all the threads that held this 50-million-year-old tapestry together. For decades, science has debated the true killer, a cold case with two primary and powerful suspects. In one corner, we have the blitzkrieg theory. This is the story of the super predator, the idea that the first intelligent and fire-wielding humans swept across this naive continent in a wave of catastrophic, efficient and unstoppable slaughter, a blitz that wiped the giants from the earth in a few bloody and terrifying millennia. In the other corner, we have the climate change theory. This is the great, impersonal and geological executioner, the story of the mega-drought, the slow, grinding and relentless thirst that starved the giants, dried their world and collapsed their ecosystem long before the first human ever stepped ashore. We have searched for a single, simple and satisfying answer. But the truth, as it is written in the red, dusty earth, is rarely simple. It was not one or the other. It was both. It was a perfect, terrible and unsurvivable storm. It was a 1-2 punch that the ancient, isolated and slow-moving world had no evolutionary answer for. The climate, the great, slow, geological thirst, was the first blow. It was the body shot. It weakened the entire system. It starved the giants. It shrank their habitat, and it concentrated them in desperate, hungry and vulnerable herds around the few, final, evaporating pools of water. The giants were on their knees, the ecosystem a hollow, brittle and dying thing, already poised on the very brink of collapse. And it was into this world of the weak, the dying and the desperate, that the second blow landed. The human super predator arrived. This was the clean, efficient and intelligent knockout punch. The humans did not have to hunt a healthy, vibrant and continent-spanning population. They simply had to find the last muddy waterhole. They simply had to harvest the final, starving and trapped survivors. And their Firest-stick farming, their revolutionary landscape-scale tool, was the final ecological nail in the coffin. The fires they set did not just herd the animals, they changed the plants. They burned away the diverse, ancient, mixed forests of the sclerophyll kingdom and promoted a new, simpler and more aggressive flora, the fire-adapted grasses. For the specialized browsers, the Diprotodon and the walking kangaroos, whose entire bodies were built to eat the woody shrubs, this was a final, dietary starvation. Their food was gone, replaced by a carpet of green, silica-filled and inedible blades. The system did not bend, it shattered. In a geological instant, perhaps in just a few thousand years, the giants were gone. The Diprotodon, the Procoptodon, the Genyornis, the Zygomaturus, the entire slow-moving ponderous larder vanished. And when the larder vanished, the specialized predators that fed upon them, the loud dangers, vanished immediately after. The Thylacoleo had nothing left to ambush. The Meiolania had nothing left to poison. The Quincana had nothing left to chase. The entire complex and terrifying dynasty of the giants, both herbivore and carnivore, was simply and quietly erased. A great, profound and sudden silence fell upon the continent. The heavy, thudding footsteps were gone. The reptilian shadows were gone. The loud, visible and epic dangers of prehistoric Australia were over. But the other danger, the cryptic peril, the small, quiet and chemical assassins that did not depend on the giants for their survival, did not vanish. They endured. The giants were dead, but their world, their venom, their ancient chemical ghosts remained. The stage was now empty, but it was, and still is, a stage that is haunted by the potent, angry and living legacy of its lost giant kings. The giants are gone. The thundering heavy footsteps of the Diprotodon and the vast cold shadow of the Meiolania have faded into the red dust, existing now only as whispers in the bedrock and faint, pigmented ghosts on the ancient stone. The great, loud drama is over. A profound, continental silence has fallen, but the danger did not vanish. It simply changed its shape. The brutal, foundational logic of this continent, the logic of a million-year arms race, the logic of the poisoned waterhole, the logic that demanded a disproportionate chemical power, did not end. The stage was emptied of its titans, but the weapons they had forged remained. This is the living, breathing and venomous legacy of prehistoric Australia. The continent we see today is the haunted, quiet and anxious survivor of that far more brutal age. The danger did not disappear. It simply became small, cryptic, and, in many ways, far more potent. The modern Australian inland taipan, a slender, shy and reclusive snake, possesses a venom so complex, so fast-acting, so neurologically devastating, that it can kill a human in under an hour. This is not an evolutionary accident. This is a chemical echo. This is a weapon that was not designed to kill the small, warm-blooded rodents it eats today. This is a weapon that was designed to kill a Diprotodon. It is a formula perfected in a laboratory of giants, a venom of such catastrophic power that it had to be capable of stopping a 4-ton, thick-skinned and slow-metabolismed marsupial in its tracks before it could turn and crush its attacker. The modern Sydney funnel web spider, its glistening black fangs filled with a unique, hypertoxic venom, is not a creature of this quiet, modern age. It is a living ghost. It is a relic, a holdover, its venom a specialized key perhaps, fitted to the lock of the ancient reptilian or early marsupial nervous systems that it shared its damp Cretaceous forest floor with. The giant Meiolania is gone, but its smaller cousins, the modern goannas, still patrol the bush, their mouths still carrying a potent, septic and perhaps truly venomous cocktail, a faint, diluted memory of the dragon's chemical fire. The bulldog ant, that primitive, stinging and sharp-eyed assassin, still leaps and stings with the same prehistoric fury, a living fossil of the forest floor's ancient, cryptic war. The continent is an arsenal. The giants have vanished, but their weapons, their chemical ghosts, have been inherited by the small, the quick, and the unassuming. The danger is no longer a loud, thundering, and obvious charge. It is a silent, hidden, and disproportionate peril. A rustle in the dry leaves, a dark shape in the boot, a shadow in the surf. The modern continent is a land defined by its survivors, and the survivors are the ones who were small enough or fast enough to escape the notice of the human super-predator, and the ones who were tough enough to endure the great thirst. But they carry in their blood, in their glands, and in their very essence the potent, angry and chemical memory of the far more dangerous world that they were born from. This is their inheritance. This is the venomous legacy. But it is not the only legacy. The land itself, the red, silent and watchful continent, remembers its lost children in a different, more philosophical way. It is a land that is still in its heart, dreaming of its monsters. The giants are gone. The venom remains. The continent is quiet now. The heavy, thudding footsteps of the Diprotodon no longer shake the red earth. The 7-meter shadow of the Meiolania no longer falls across the waterhole. The dry eucalyptus forests are no longer filled with the explosive, vertical ambush of the marsupial lion or the galloping, reptilian chase of the quincana. The great, loud drama is over. A profound continental silence has fallen. But the continent itself, the land, has a memory. It is a memory that is written in the ancient, red and tired soil. It is a memory held in the vast, open and watchful silence of the outback. This is a land that is, in its very essence, haunted. It is a land that is still dreaming of its monsters. To travel through Australia today is to travel through a landscape that feels, in its deep, geological heart, empty. It is a stage that is too large, too vast, and too quiet for the small, quick, and nervous actors that now inhabit it. The small, modern kangaroo, the echidna, the wombat, they are the survivors, the humble understudies, living in a cathedral that was built for titans. The land itself seems to wait. The dry, empty riverbeds, the vast, shimmering salt pans, the hazy, blue-lit and aromatic silence of the eucalyptus forest, all of it feels poised, as if in a state of suspended, ancient anticipation, waiting for the return of its true, giant and terrible kings. The danger of that lost world, the world that was perhaps the most dangerous place in Earth's history, has not truly vanished. It has simply submerged. It has become a part of the land's psyche. It is in the chemical, prehistoric potency of the taipan's venom. It is in the ancient, stinging fury of the bulldog ant. And it is in the profound, watchful and reptilian patience of the modern saltwater crocodile, a living, breathing and unchanged tyrant, a direct 200-million-year-old link to that far more brutal age. This, then, is the legacy of prehistoric Australia. It is a story of isolation, of fire, of thirst, and of a strange, parallel and dreamlike evolution. It is a story of a land that built a world of pouched lions and venomous dragons, a world of impossible, overlapping and layered dangers. And it is, finally, a story of a profound and sudden silence. The giants are gone, but their dream remains. It is a dream that is held in the red, silent, and watchful heart of the continent itself. And if you listen, in the deep, quiet, and hypnotic hum of a hot Australian night, you can almost hear it. The faint, distant, and heavy footstep of a monster that is no longer there. The slow, patient, and ancient breath of a land that is and will forever be dreaming of its lost, giant, and terrible children.